There has been a lot of criticism about the PFL, a lot of curiosity, and a lot of good things that have happened. It's a mix. But if there's one kind of common denominator, it's that people generally still aren't quite comfortable with the product, and there's a lot of demand for change. Even this 2024 PFL championship came with elbows that were allowed in all of the fights, not just the title ones. And that was well received. And I think if you go back, BC, to the Dakota Ditcheva fight, the use of the elbows there were absolutely fantastic and played an important role and gave the fans something more to be excited about. But allowing elbows seems like a pretty small thing. You can do it, but it doesn't necessarily change the entire dynamic of what's happening. But what would? So for topic number 2, we're going to go and pick 3 things we would each do for the PFL to change in 2025 to make a better product. BC, I'd like to pitch it to you first. I know you've written a column similar to this kind of concept, which may have been a little bit bigger, but give me your top 3. What are the changes PFL should make in 2025 for a more dynamic product?
Okay, my number one, and then to be fair, my number one kind of extends into everything. And I wrote, I guess, the top 5 for CBS Sports heading into this card about things I think PFL should do or could do to try to do what they say they're doing, which is we're not here to be number 2. We're here to compete with UFC for number 1. So what would be my biggest point of concern? The fact that they so aggressively build horizontally and don't seem to be putting their best strength, their best powers together and giving one big swing. How could you compete with the number 1 when you're trying so hard to establish 18 brands under your banner and all these different championships? We got a super fight championship, we got a regular season tournament championship, we got Bellator champions. I think there's a few other champions in there too. That it's kind of like when you watch Kitchen Nightmares or any of these celebrity chef shows. What's the first thing they do when they go into a struggling restaurant? They're like, oh, your menu has 400 items on it. We're going to bring that down to 9. Like, it's hard to be as aggressive as PFL is trying to be by diversifying and stretching out horizontally when it's at the stake of watering down your actual overall product. Like, it's cool that you can call yourself the Champions League of MMA, like it's the EPL or some other soccer comparison, but like, who cares? So I would say the biggest way to, like, I enjoyed that final card. I didn't watch it live, but I enjoyed that. I even like, by the way, I think swapping out Ken Flo and bringing in Dan Hardy, this trio is pretty damn good, pretty damn elite in terms of Randy Couture and Sean O'Connell there. Dan Hardy as an interviewer is kind of becoming my favorite for that job, although I think Rogan is still super elite in that specific role of the post-fight interview. But like, I liked a lot of this, but I want to continue to like it. And the way to do that is almost, in my opinion, in old school pro wrestling territory mindset or pride mindset of like storylining and everything playing together. Every match, every fight should lead and carry on toward the ultimate goal of the title. Well, the problem is we got too many titles and we got too many brands, and it's confusing, and it just waters down what PFL has, a puncher's chance of making a dent in what UFC does and the control they have. You can argue to how big that dent can ever become, but like, competition is great. It's fun. It fuels entertainment. Why wouldn't you take your entire roster, bring it together, one champion per division, simplify it, and say, this is what we got? I don't care how many pay-per-views you try. It's your financial risk, but give yourself a fighting chance. Like, it's cool that you signed Jake Paul, but what does that mean for the cage? It's cool you signed Amanda Serrano, but what does that mean for the MMA cage, right? And Ngannou's only fought once. But if you could take some of these guys on Friday that we did enjoy, and now it's like, oh, well, they haven't fought these Bellator guys over here. Guys, bring it together and give yourself one chance at swinging big and catching Strike Force magic or Bellator at certain points when they had certain strategies and they were making, especially on live cable TV, huge impacts in the sport. So, Luke, I know I just gave you like 18 answers in one, but it all goes back, in my opinion, to building upwards before you even consider buying all the properties on the monopoly board. Like, nobody cares if you have 18 different sub promotions. We want to see your best fighters. We like your broadcast for the most part. Tell us stories, weave it together, and then let the best fight the best. And then you can maybe have an argument that you've got the best division in this, specific weight class and better than the UFC. But you're never going to be able to make that argument unless you take all the items in your cupboard that we care about and put it together and make some fun comfort meals here. All right. Like, stop overvaluing what you have. You don't have it yet. So, Luke, I'll throw it back to you. I hope you're going to get on them for selling some tickets live, but like I think before you do anything to make changes, take your biggest swing with your best product. Put them all together. Enough of this separation, segregation bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more with you got to build vertically and not horizontally. Having 1,000 brands. If you have two quarterbacks, you have none. If you have the champ, no one is asking for the Champions League of MMA, especially when the real Champions League involves the most popular sport on the most well-financed continent between the world's most adored brands with the world's best players. Not a single part of that involves anything the PFL is doing. And so you have to be consistent and understand that from the get-go. I did pick three of them. Now I could pick 300 of them because I genuinely think the product needs that much work. However, the three ones that I would pick, BC, would be as follows to move this segment forward. Number one, I think they should keep the tournament, but like Bellator, one tournament at a time. One tournament at a time.
Yeah.
Pick a weight class, pick a moment in time, select and identify which weight class best suited for this, make it for $1 million, and run that thing through the course of a season. Or maybe you can run it for half and then another half. Like you could run two a year at most, but one tournament at a time, first and foremost. Number two, BC. This might be my most controversial one, so I'd be very curious to get some feedback from you on this. I do not understand what the point is of having a traveling circus if nobody shows up to see it wherever it goes. I don't get that. I don't get why you're in San Antonio one week and you're in Detroit the next and you're in San Diego the next one and you're in Florida for that one if you've got about 100 to 500 people in attendance at any given time. It seems to me a gigantic waste of resources and personnel and time. Now, is it the long-term goal to be able to go to San Antonio and Atlanta and Tampa? Of course it is. That can be a place long term that you want to get to. But that is not even remotely where they are now. And it seems very foolish to spend money in that direction. What I think would be best is if they had some kind of, and hear me out on this, what I'm not going to call intimate venue, but mid intimate venue, somewhere around 1,000 to maybe 2,000 people seated at most in a home base Apex like scenario. To me, BC, I really don't like that the UFC's in the Apex, in part because it facilitates having this bloated roster. And also, they actually can go on the road and sell tickets and are choosing not to. That is very, very different from what the PFL is doing, which is choosing not to save by having a more intimate home base and then going on the road and then having to pay per events. And even that doesn't really work. The two should be flipped, or at least there should be some differences in how they both currently approach it. It is the PFL that is in need of their own Apex. And I don't mean like a barn warehouse where it's echoing and no one's showing up to that either. Some kind of a place, whether it's the guys are from DC, you could put it here, or New York, or someplace cheap, Florida. I don't care. I don't care where it is. Some place where you can reliably pack in a few hundred to maybe more people at a time, and you can get these shows in there. You can make it look how you want. You can save on these costs. And then, BC, you go on the road with cards that you're making the best available fights on. Before I go any further, what do you think of that?
You're nailing it. You're absolutely nailing it. It's inevitably it's just simplify. They're trying to do way too much. They're like when a rich, celebrity person buys a sports team and thinks they can run it, video game style or fantasy football style, and then you kind of realize. I mean, look, I'd add on to there, like empower MMA people to make MMA decisions. That's my
Oh,
number
yeah.
two, right?
Yeah.
That's got it. Like there's smart people in that company. Dan Hardy, Randy Couture, Ray Sefo. I mean, there's a bunch of experienced names who've been through different parts of this business and been through the wars. I just don't get the feeling that MMA decisions are being made all the time by MMA people. So, can I add one more on top of that, Luke?
Please.
Um, you don't have to try to get somebody that meets Dana's personalities or quirks or style, but they've got to have a mouthpiece for the company. And I've by the way said this about PBC and boxing. I think that's the one miss they've had too, of being too silent and too behind the scenes. They've got to have a voice that in my opinion the public, fight fans, and the media like trust and find credible. and you can still protect the company and do the used car salesman stuff. But I think right now, what we get from the PFL's faces, from Peter Murray, from Don Davis, is like, we've already won the battle talk. You know what I mean? Like, they're trying to show you, like, are you not intelligent enough to see how successful they are right now? And it's like, you don't want your fans and your critics, in my opinion, to question, like, do they have the right people running the show? Give us a mouthpiece that can be accessible, that can be the in between, that can sell your vision better, and hopefully that can steer the ship toward simplifying and making more MMA decisions above making TV decisions, or, marketing decisions. Like, at some point at the end of the day, what are you selling? If you're selling MMA, then make MMA the leading sell. Give us your best cut of the steak. And that involves everything I said before. Consolidate and come with, you know what I mean? You don't just talk like you carry a big stick. Let's go, load it up and swing it, right? Right, Luke?
Yes, I totally agree. May I give you my third and final one here a little bit? If someone asks you, what does Pepsi taste like? You can't just say not like Coke. It doesn't tell you much. And by the way, it also doesn't tell you anything great, because Coca-Cola tastes great. Its sort of brand is synonymous with great tasting Coca, or great tasting cola, great tasting soda, whatever you want to call it, pop, depending on where you're from. But saying that, like, Pepsi is different than Coke, but what does that mean? It has no identity, and it has really no way to share like a concept. You have to do something that is very different from them. Now, of course, you are constrained by what you can do in the United States and a lot of other regulated territories, but here's what I mean. Rather, you cannot be Coca-Cola, so don't even try to be. Don't even try to be a Pepsi Cola, which again is going to have a hard time identifying itself as a coherent brand and identity. They need to be Mountain Dew. They need to have a rule set that catches the eye. They need to have a rule set that sets itself apart and makes it a genuine alternative. If there is one thing that they can take from one championship, it is the notion that they are a genuine alternative to the UFC. Now, they have their own problems, and we've been over it a million times. It's not asking to borrow everything that they do, but they are different. They are meaningfully different. PFL, as it stands, is a place where also good fighters fight, but what is their brand identity? When the WEC was around before being acquired, it had an identity, and maybe some of that was a little bit of romanticism, is somewhat in hindsight, but it was like your smaller guys. It's action packed. It's highly technical. It was a great, different, dynamic product. The UFC couldn't even compete with that. So you know what they did? They just fucking bought them. They just said, we're going to take those weight classes those guys have and just make them ours. That is doing something a little bit different. Now we're in a different age. We can't just go to different weight classes and as easily just come up with some kind of alternative. But if your program is just going to be, hey, we also do nice and shiny looking broadcast TV, it's just also UFC, but not with guys you've heard of, nothing good will ever happen here. There must be some kind of meaningful differentiator in how the product is made in order to set itself apart as an actual, not even so much competitor, alternative for UFC fans.
Yes. And look, that is why the mouthpiece, in my opinion, has to be filled and has to be filled first. And I don't know if it can be a Chael Sonnen. I don't know if he's the perfect fit for that. But like everything you just said, everything I said about you want to be able to trust the brand. Look, when promoters are at their best, they're not just great entertainment salesmen. They're like, I don't know, they're like leading a cause, and they can get you caught up in the cause. That's probably Dana's greatest strength back in the day when UFC was climbing. Like, he made you want that for that company, and by proxy the whole sport, to succeed, to be the underdog, the little engine that could. I think PFL should embrace that side of the identity, because if you're swinging big at the big number one, that's basically designed how this game is played at the highest level, you are an underdog story. So I think you need that mouthpiece so they can set the narratives week to week, and they can be that storyteller in constantly getting people on your side and leaning into your chances of disrupting the market. But I don't think they have that right now. I mean, I don't think that you can put enough value in that, Luke. That's just my opinion. And it doesn't have to be somebody like Dana. Like, Scott Coker's not the most charismatic guy, but I think we trusted him to a certain degree and respected the fight that he was taking on. and wanted that to succeed. They got to get us waving the flag and saying, no, hold on, PFL is really good. Like, you don't have to be the ECW, but you have to have ECW level disruption, and they haven't figured out the right formula to disrupt yet.
BC, we didn't mention this, but one X factor for 2025 is absolutely going to be the Francis Ngannou sweepstakes
Yes.
and how they play that. Let's show this on the screen. This was a tweet he sent over the weekend. John Jones still out here, I mean, on Thanksgiving, replying to people about being called a duck. And John was like, crazy how being called a duck pays better than most of you internet tough guys will make in a lifetime. Hey, in fairness, John, there was an OnlyFans model who revealed they made $4 million a month, $48 million in a year. They make more than him, and I don't know how noble it is, but it doesn't really have
Was
to
this
be.
person showing anus, Luke? Like, what levels are we
I've not.
talking?
I don't know. I've not paid for it, but whatever it is, it's working. I could say that. If you're making 50 mil a year, showing butthole and feet, I mean, God bless you. So Francis replies to this and says, "Blessings make haters uncomfortable, but they can't change it. There's only one fight, the right fight, that will multiply your blessings." Hashtag Ngannou versus Jones. BC, I wonder what you make of this and what the PFL can and should do. Goltsov is not a bad fight. I don't hate that fight, but it's got not a lot of juice. What should they do?
If they're doing what I think they're doing, like a calculated move in the direction, which they should, even if you think it's a Hail Mary, the embrace of, hey, John, forget about the Aspinall fight. We know you don't want it, but you should want this one, the real legacy fight. And the only way it's going to happen, and we're not there yet in the build where we're talking this honestly, and maybe we never will. I'm trying to think of it too much in pro wrestling terms, but the real sell here is that this fight has the potential to be so special and such a once in a lifetime. If you want to make a comparison to, landmark Rumble in the Jungle type fights in boxing, has MMA had that yet? Well, you had Fedor versus Crow Cop, which had like a, pro wrestling feel and sort of like the regalness of it and the build and but we don't get that too often. So this is the right move if this is Francis and PFL Brass teaming up and going like, we've got to change the narrative and we've got to aggressively put out there that this fight is possible. It could be made. It just comes down. I mean, I think they should be, this is where I think taking on, again, almost a pro wrestling angle of heel work here publicly, of trying to goad them into it. Put it out there. Say to the media, the only person holding this super fight of super fights up from happening is Dana White. Because Luke, I wonder if we're learning what we're starting, from reading the John S. Nashes and the MMA draws, and we're starting to really understand for the first time for some of us, like the real business of this business, then like, I wonder if it's best for business, TKO business, that UFC did entertain some type of Jones and Ngannou crossover, since they're on the same network. Like, it's not, I think this is the right move if this is everybody saying, like, hold on, we got one chance at this. We know that John doesn't even want that super fight that they're trying to build. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you go to the level of embarrassing yourself even to try to put that out there and get people talking about it? So I support this, Luke. You think I'm crazy?
I don't think you're crazy, but there was one idea that was poo-pooed, and let me be clear, I don't like it. I'm not going to tell you this because I like it. I'm saying if we're trying to save PFL's fortunes, which is a different conversation, what would we do? BC, if it were me and I was at the PFL, and I know people would complain, but it wouldn't matter. I would try and book a changed rules bout, because I'm not sure what you would call it, to have striking only, but with like MMA sensibility, between Deontay Wilder and Francis in the PFL smart cage.
Yes.
Right. I would not let that fight take place in boxing if I had any way to stop it.
Because you might be able to convince, you might be able to convince Jake, if it's a success, to Jake to try something stupid like that under your
100%. 100%. And again, would the fight be stupid? Almost certainly. Has Deontay Wilder been shot for a while now? No, like, without question. I'm not telling you I would like it. What I'm telling you is, if you're trying to book something on curiosity, at least exploring ideas like that is going to be much better for them, because you're locked out of the monopoly with UFC. And Goltsov is, as we said, dude, that was how many times do you see a heavyweight win from their guard these days? I mean, it's so incredibly rare. And he choked the guy out completely in Popov. Like, did a great job. He's a great fighter. I have a ton of respect for him, but there's not a lot of juice to it because of Colo. Those goddamn tournaments don't do a lot for a lot of these guys in terms of changing how the public perceives them or even making them recognized more broadly. Something like this gets you a little bit closer, even though it's gimmicky and fucking crazy as hell. Honestly, what is the UFC doing? You can't do that. Try something a little bit different and
Well,
then do
Luke,
more of that.
if they don't open up the rosters, in my opinion, like first thing 2025, and maybe just come out. And I think I guess to do that, you probably have to change your format, which I still think is one of the biggest things they should do. We've talked about it. You agree. Drop the regular season and playoff thing is too grueling. So once you get them to that point, I think we're going to find out if they're truly serious when this new year starts, because right now they've got a split roster, people in almost separate divisions or federations, but there's no interleague play, or I guess outside of their one pay-per-view where they tried that, and then the actual second pay-per-view to open the year, which was probably the high points of the year for PFL. The PFL versus Bellator pay-per-view in February and the October Ngannou one. And to some degree, both were successes, at least critically. I don't know about, commercially, but well, the Ngannou one seemed to definitely be commercially. But like they gotta, I don't know, man. They really got to lean in that idea. Like you've got to start building up to what the possibility of the big breakthrough fights can be. You've got to really just, if they start this year separating the rosters, who else are they? Like, what's been the biggest problem with the Bellator fighters in PFL so far? Outside of like what app are they on and why can't I find it? It's really been like, oh, they're just rematching fights we've already seen them fight in Bellator. Well, then you mirror that with the problem already of the PFL tournament format. It's rematches constantly all the time, only it's largely rematches of like some second and third rate fighters, to be very fair, right? So you have more need than ever to cross pollinate, merge the rosters together, and give us fresh matchups. If they open the new year without that, and they're just leaning on, well, if we can get one big pay per view or something, then the ship's going to sink. But they got to start, they got to light the match. That's what I'm saying. Like every time they get a spark, they act like they've won already, and this is proof of concept. They got a long way to go, but I think, in my opinion, if they open the new year with that same structural format, which is the biggest thing holding them back, then I'm going to know what direction they're headed, Luke.
Just remember, and BC, I think you know the answer to this. Who is the most popular fighter in the history of Bellator?
Kimbo.
Kimbo Slice. Kimbo versus Ken Shamrock and Kimbo versus Dada. Again, you can only do these in limited doses. It cannot be the core of your product, otherwise it will fail as well. You cannot go down that path. But never forget that the most popular fighter in the history of Bellator by a considerable margin is Kimbo freaking Slice. That is why he got used, and it was very, very helpful for them, at least at that time, in trying to stand out from the crowd. PFL needs not to go down a path where that's what they do, but where they can sprinkle that in, I think would be, among other changes, well received.